एक खाली साइड पर लगतो गरोडियन जन डिजिटल डिस्प्ले slide. Welcome.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. How are we all? All good?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Ben.
Thank you.
Hi, Rahul.
Our society is looking for a development to redevelop its device. So, can you connect me with your email address? So, I'll get sir.
How's the weather today, Ben?
No snow. Yeah, all the snow's gone. Still a little fresh out there, but beautiful day yesterday. It was about 0 degrees and sunny, and I got out on the bike yesterday for the first time in a bit of time.
That's good to see. Keeping yourself fit. This weather is.
Trying. Yeah. What about there? Are you still baking out there?
It is. No. Delhi has 7 to 8 degrees minimum.
Yeah. And the earthquake that was further north, hasn't been much on the news other than the first day.
So yeah, there are a lot of earthquakes which happens in Nepal, in that region. There was a major earthquake in, I think, 2015-16 somewhere.
There was an announcement on the day, but there's been very little news since. It's been all about the wildfires in Los Angeles and election stuff. But the interesting.
So I'm sure you must be also knowing. You must be knowing about the Mahakumbh, which is happening after 144 years.
Yes. Yep. It's quite.
Good afternoon, Ben. I'm Sundarajan from Pondicherry, India.
How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Fine.
Good, great.
And you should visit Pondicherry. It's a beautiful place.
Please. Always welcome.
Yeah, I would love to.
Both of you.
Love to.
It has a French connections. It was a French colony.
It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay. I can do that.
Still there are a lot of French traces are here.
Yeah. And the architecture. Yep.
Same kind of streets are here, and same kind of people are here, and they are following the French traditions also.
The French have got a great way of life, so particularly in the south of France.
Wait. And if you see some buildings, the French consulate, they follow the French architectures.
Beautiful. Yep.
Yes.
So do they make the wine? That's the problem. Are you making the wine down there? Or?
Please. Always welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I will take you around.
Okay. We'll work on that. Okay.
Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Ben, Sandeep is not well.
All right. Okay.
So yeah,
and Alex can't make it either, can he?
Okay. Yeah, we heard about it. Sorry for his loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the way of life.
Yeah. So how do you want to play this, Rahul?
So we will.
Yeah, I've got a presentation ready to talk through.
Yeah, so we can take that along, and then there are question answers which Sandeep sir has created. So yeah, I'll present those questions, and then Saurabh will be there in some time.
Okay, you tell me when
So,
you
yeah.
want me to start.
Yeah, just another 2 minutes.
Okay. And I would think a presentation for about 30 minutes. Is that okay, Saurabh?
Yeah, we can stretch it a little. We can
Yeah,
discuss
okay.
more about it.
Sure.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today's session, it's going to be IVS 102, basis of value. And we have our speaker today, Ben Elder. I think most of you know about Ben. He is responsible for delivering the RICS Global Valuation Strategy, focusing on global financial stability through the application of IVS. So yes, he has been involved with the IVSC from very long time, and he has been an economist and a chartered valuation surveyor, and has an extensive experience as a valuer, academic, and advisor to global organizations, including the ECB, World Bank, and United Nations. He is a fellow of RICS, specializes in the valuation standards, ESG impact on real estate, and developing valuation framework for emerging markets. Ben has also served as a chair for the IVSC Tangible Asset Board and FIG Commission 9 valuation, contributing to the standards of the RICS Red Book and basic regulations as well. And today's topic, what is on the basis of value, it's going to be, the basis of value as outlined, the points that Ben is going to cover, the types of value, basis of value, its critical considerations. He'll also discuss about the key takeaways, and of course, lastly, the conclusion. So I would request Ben, to take over the session. He's going to share a PPT now.
Thank you, Rahul, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many old friends and new friends. And if you've heard me speak before, I'm very surprised that you've turned up again to listen. So, but you're very kind to accept and invite me back again to share some ideas with you, but I'm really looking forward to trying to understand the challenges that you face in your work. And I'm guessing, and it is a guess, some of the challenges that you have around client instructions and what they ask for, and then trying to move those instructions into recognized bases of value from the IVSC. So I'm really looking forward to perhaps having that conversation, perhaps around things like forced sale, particularly in the residential market, but also then trying to apply the basis of value to the approaches and methods that are used. And I think that's probably an important message to start with about the international valuation standards, that they are an overarching set of standards. And I found, particularly from students, but also from some professional practitioners, that they tend to look in the index, find the bit that is associated with the job there or the assignment they're trying to complete, and then just going straight to that point within the standards. And they do the same with the RICS Red Book. But that's a big mistake, because both documents, both the International Valuation Standards, the IVSs, and the RICS Red Book, which incorporates the International Valuation Standards, are written as a document which needs to be read from the beginning through all the sections. I sometimes say if you jump to parts, it's a bit like reading a novel, but without reading the first chapter to find out who all the characters are and what their roles are. So I would really encourage you to take some time and read the International Valuation Standards, particularly the framework
Sir,
part.
sir, excuse me, sir, your voice is breaking.
It's breaking up.
Not
Can
clearly
you not
audible.
hear me? Sorry, it's not good if it's not working. Can anybody else having the problem?
Ben, no, I think it's a problem with Arunji. Arunji, there's a problem with your internet. So you just
No, sir,
refresh it.
my internet is fantastic. Your voice I am
We
hearing.
are able to. No, it's not. It's not. Are everybody able to hear him properly?
Ah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's quite clear.
Then I am going to check it again.
Please,
Okay,
thank you.
good. Okay. Yeah. You've got a sensible internet which takes out every other word which I speak. So it's that's good. Okay. So I'd encourage you all to read and understand the international valuation standards and trying to put all the parts together. Today we're going to look at the basis of value, and I think this is actually one of the most important areas of the international valuation standards. It really goes to the heart of what the international standards are trying to achieve, which is consistency, it's transparency, it's about being able to compare the various parts of the transactions that we get involved in. It may be sales, it may be taxation, it may be secured lending. Whatever the purpose of the valuation is, the bases of value provide that consistency of approach and delivery, which is key to providing the information our clients need. And what's often not understood is that what the bases of value do is create hypothetical circumstances. They don't exist normally, and they create this framework then which allows you to compare one asset or liability with another asset or liability on the same basis, which is the important part. So creating a framework which allows you to compare and then use that data for information to inform our clients and come to a valuation. But what that really means also is that, for example, if we just think about market value for the moment, market value is not always the same as price, as you will know, because it's created a separate set of hypothetical circumstances which surround the transaction. And this also makes it really challenging to be a valuer, because and valuation is not supposed to be easy. It's a really difficult subject, and takes a real skill level to understand and to extract the information. So, for example, and I usually get into trouble when I say this, particularly to students, is that remember, when you're valuing, you're not valuing a structure. You're not valuing the bricks, the mortar, the concrete, the glass, whatever the building is made out of, or the land which it sits on. What you're valuing is the rights to use those buildings and those and the land. And usually that is held within documentation, within contracts. So actually what you're valuing is contractual obligations, so that you are looking at the right to use something which has value, and that's what people will pay for. And I know in various parts of India and the subcontinent, and right there, also in the UK and different parts of the world, not all land is registered. And so those documents which you might rely on in a well-regulated, transparent market, perhaps like London, aren't always available. And so you have to do a lot of investigation. And again, if you've heard me speak before, I often say it's a bit like being Sherlock Holmes, the detective, that you've got to go out into the marketplace, you've got to find your evidence. And you've got to find evidence which may have to stand up in a court of law at some point. And when we start to try to think about the comparable evidence which we use to undertake valuations, whatever methodology we adopt and whatever approach we adopt, and we'll come to that in the presentation shortly, we use comparable evidence. But what we really need to understand is what basis that comparable evidence, what that transaction from those comparable evidence were actually made on. So we need to understand if there were any circumstances which significantly altered what rights and what's right to use were being transacted within that transaction. And we don't always have access to all the documentations, but we do need to understand whether a transaction which we're going to use for comparable evidence is on a like-to-like basis, or if it's not on a like-to-like basis, what adjustments we are going to make as professionals to that evidence, so that we can use it in the next stage of the valuation. So understanding that premise, that process that we're going to look at this morning or this afternoon is really important. And we'll try to draw out some of the nuances, some of the very small adjustments which quite often get overlooked in understanding, but are actually very key to delivering an accurate and proper valuation. And again, this goes back to some of the principles of the International Valuation Standards and the Red Book about your knowledge and understanding. And this is where local knowledge comes into being part of that delivery mechanism for the valuation. So understanding your local market and having that history which you can then apply to the valuation becomes very critical. And that whole part. I'm going to start to try to share my screen now and see whether this actually works. Let's go for that one. Can you see that, Rahul?
Yes.
Yes. All good?
Yes.
Great.
All good.
So what I want to do is just to run through a few slides this morning, just to talk about the principles. And I sometimes use the analogy that it's a bit like when you buy a car. You look at the performance of that car, excuse me, you look at that performance of that car. And one of the things which I would look at, being fairly old and is not, I don't understand the electric cars, but the petrol and diesel cars, you look at the miles per gallon or kilometers per litre that you expect that car to do. Now, that is, I don't expect to buy that car and it actually do that exact number which which the manufacturers predict. But again, this is very much like the basis of value, that those manufacturers have a set process to deliver that miles per gallon or kilometers per litre, so that I can compare a Mercedes with a Toyota, with a Honda, with engines of similar size. And the way that those car manufacturers deliver that data to me as a customer is to run specific tests at controlled speeds for a period of time. So there are a set of criteria. So all the manufacturers are supposed to use that same set of criteria to create some numbers for the performance of their vehicles. And then I read that, I make my choice, but I don't expect the actual car to deliver exactly that amount of performance, because it depends how I will drive it. So again, what the basis of value for the IVSC are trying to do is to create that comparable framework so that our clients can understand and compare one potential investment with the other. Just check on that. So moving forward, hopefully the audio's holding up. Okay, so slight introduction. We've done some of this already. The basis of value is the foundation of a valuation is performed. So how is a valuation performed? And what the basis of value do is create this this framework on which the valuation is performed. Again, if you read the IVSs, without a basis of value, it is not a valuation. You must have a basis of value which describes the number which you're producing, because without that, that number is of little meaning. The purpose is to ensure consistency, transparency and confidence in valuations globally. So market value is the same in Delhi as it is in London, as it is in New York. The process is exactly the same, and it creates that transparency so that individuals or organizations, companies, pension funds will be able to compare an investment in different parts of the world, but also locally. And I'm sure that you know better than I do that there can be quite significant variances in value with real estate, which is very close together. And what this basis of value allows you to do is to create that consistency that that is useful to our clients. And the bottom part is again taken from the IVSs, from the glossary, and the basis of valuation is the fundamental premises on which the reported values are to be based. So it creates the premises, and we'll look at some of the premises at the moment. And again, this is where sort of language starts to become technical. So we're talking about the basis of value, and those are a set of words which have been agreed. But we're also then looking at the premise of value, which is a slightly different thing. The premise of value feeds into the basis of value. But we'll look at that again in a moment. So what are the IVSC defined bases of value? And as Rahul kindly pointed out, that I've been involved with the IVSC for many years. And before I became involved with the IVSC, one of the first roles I had within the professional body at the RICS. This was when I didn't work for them at the time. This was back in the early 80s, 1980s, when I was asked to join a committee to try and define market rent. And you'll see that's one of the defined bases of value below. And I thought, oh yeah, I'll join that committee, that's okay. It'll only take a couple of afternoons to decide that. Well, 6 months later, we were still debating the words which would make up the definition of market rent. So it shows how little I knew about the process and the time it takes to actually get agreement on words which then enter both the Red Book and the International Valuation Standards. So the IVSC defined bases of value are market value, market rent, equitable value, investment value, synergistic value, and liquidation value. And there are other bases of value, and I've just put down there probably the most common one, which I'm sure that you all get involved in at various times, is the fair value from the International Financial Reporting Standards. It's very close to market value in most cases, but it is slightly different. And again, making sure that we are delivering what our client needs, what they're going to do with the valuation is very important. And that can sometimes be quite hard to get that information from our clients before we start the work. But it's really important that we understand and we have this transparency in delivering what the basis of value might mean. We'll look at the premise of value. So just going back, those are the defined basis of value. And during my time at the International Valuation Standards on the Tangible Assets Board, we are always having debates about whether there's a need for an additional basis of value for particular circumstances. I remember back in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, the RICS introduced a new basis of value, estimated realization price. And that was sort of to try to give a number which was closer to price than to value. But actually there were so many variables which sat inside that estimated realization price that it was actually, as the RICS dropped that definition. And the only other one, which again, I'm sure that you come across all the time, is that people still ask for open market value, whereas the open part was dropped many, many years ago because it doesn't have any additional meaning in that space. So again, probably during the conversations, we will start to look at those definitions and where and how they're to be used. But moving on to the premise of value, the premise of value or assumed use describes the circumstances of how an asset or liability is used. Different bases of value may require a particular premise of value or allow for considerations of multiple premises of value. The most common premises of value used in the International Valuation Standards are highest and best use, the current use or existing use, orderly liquidation, and forced sale. Now, so we're talking about the assumptions, the conditions which we are then going to superimpose onto the basis of value which are defined within the International Valuation Standards. Sorry, I've got a message which come up on my sorry, a message on my machine telling me something which I don't understand, but I'll continue, and hopefully that you are still receiving the pictures at your end. So we're looking at the premise or the purpose, the process. So does your client need the highest and best use? So, for example, on a piece of land on the outskirts of a town, which might be used for urban development, or do they want it in the existing use, i.e. as farmland? What would be reasonable to assume in those places? Is there going to be an order liquidation? In other words, if there's there are circumstances, particularly in the business valuation arena, where if there's a liquidation, the market actually becomes flooded with the particular asset or liability, and if there's an oversupply, we know what happens to the price or the value, because it will fall. So can you assume an orderly liquidation process, i.e. that the market will not become flooded with the particular goods? And then the one which is not a basis of value, for sale. It often gets used as a basis or quoted as a basis of value, but it's actually not. It's a premise of value. And what we're really talking about when we're talking about for sale value, and I say I'd love to hear some of your comments regarding this in a short period of time when we get to the questions. But for sale is actually around, sorry, I'm going to cough, so I'm just going to put myself, you apologise. It is about a limited marketing period. So if you have to sell something quickly, what would the normal marketing period be? And then what would the consequences of reducing that marketing period be? And this is really difficult because, again, in the RICS Red Book, we discourage, we don't like the use of forced sale value, because you need to know what the reason for the forced sale is before you could apply any meaningful adjustment to your valuation. So, for example, where I live, one of the major employers is Rolls-Royce, the aero engine workers. Now, Rolls-Royce actually went into liquidation about in the mid 70s, early 80s, and that had an enormous impact on the income for this particular area. And it meant many people, unfortunately, couldn't pay their mortgages, and therefore there was a downward trend in values because of the change in employment situation. And that was why some people were forced into selling their properties so that they could be relieved from their mortgage obligations. Now that's completely different from, say, an individual who's forced to sell their house, perhaps because they're getting a divorce. So that's the only pressure. The market remains the same, but the individual circumstances are forcing the sale. So you need to understand what the rationale behind the for sale value is before you can make any comment. And one of the things which we're introducing into the Red Book residential section is this concept of forced sale. And what we're suggesting is that the valuer needs to make a comment about the market conditions at the date of valuation, and then also make a comment about whether if the marketing period was limited at that point in time, as the market exists, whether any adjustment in the value for a forced sale would be recommended. So we're talking now about premise of value rather than basis of value. just getting a little bit of feedback from somebody, and that's great. Thank you. So if you could all just make sure that you are on mute. So let's have a look at the most common. I'm guessing it's the most common one that you will all come across, and that's market value. And market value is the estimated amount for which an asset or liability should exchange on the valuation date between a willing buyer and a willing seller in an arm's length transaction after proper marketing, and where the parties have each acted knowledgeably, prudently, and without compulsion. So this is a really interesting one. We use this all the time. But if we start to segment that sentence down, we start to see some of the challenges that we have in converting price, i.e. the transaction number, into this definition of market value. So first of all, it's an estimated amount. So it is an estimated, it's not a fact, for which an asset or liability, so it could be either, it could be a positive or a negative, should exchange, first of all, on the valuation date. So the other transactions that we may be using as the comparables are very unlikely to be absolutely the same date. So again, and that date can be in the past, can be a historic, excuse me, valuation, or it could be today. It can't be in the future. It's not a predictive value. So we're now looking at the exchange date and when that fits alongside the comparable evidence between a willing buyer and a willing seller. And again, that's quite easy to say, but are all buyers and sellers in transactions willing? So there's very often there's one of the parties isn't really a willing seller. So you need to understand, again, from your evidence collection, your comparable evidence collection, were the parties involved in that transaction which created the price you're trying to adjust both willing, or were there some other rationale for the transaction taking place? So again, was there a mortgage which was being foreclosed? Was there some other opportunity which the seller wanted to take advantage of before they actually to force them to accept a slightly different price for the assets? In an arm's length transaction, so in other words, where both parties acted with transparency and there weren't any undue pressures or family relationships which influenced the transaction. Again, after proper marketing, so proper marketing for that type of asset and liability. So was it on the market for a long time, or not such a long time, or perhaps even a very short time, might start to impact the transaction price that was obtained? And where the parties had each acted knowledgeably, prudently, and without compulsion. So again, we're saying that the parties within the transaction actually understood the market, and that they acted reasonably, fairly safely, and there was no compulsion in the actual transaction process. So we need to analyze all our comparable evidence for those factors before we start to use it to be a comparable evidence paper. I always remember doing some work in India. It was too many years ago to say, well, I guess it's probably 20 years ago now. And we were trying with a group of valuers to understand what was happening in the marketplace. And this was where the prices for apartments were being advertised in the paper, but also there was an expectation that additional monies were paid in cash. So there was a transaction which occurred and was documented, but there were additional payments made, and this was to allegedly avoid taxation issues. So I asked the group of valuers, when they were using comparable evidence, which number did they use? Did they use the transacted number, i.e. the recorded number, or what they knew had actually exchanged in the deal? And the fairly strong message I got back was the transaction document. They ignored the actual additional payments being made in cash. And I challenged them to say, well, that's not market value then. It doesn't meet the criteria which are described in that sentence there. As you can imagine, there was quite a vigorous debate which then followed in the wake of that. I think I convinced some of the people that you needed to add the transaction costs and the additional payment to get to market value, but I didn't convince everybody in the room. So again, be interesting to hear your comments later. Just a note again, that's one of the points which I quite often come across globally, is this question around transaction costs. So most bases of value represent the estimated price of an asset without adjustments for seller's costs or for the buyer's costs of purchasing or any taxation. And this is on the basis that each transaction, particularly for market value, is for an individual. Now, if you're doing investment value, which is worth, you might well want to make it clear whether you are included the transaction costs for your parties. But the international standards basically take out the transaction costs because you don't know what the tax liability might be for an individual or a company that will impact what they pay, but excuse me, but the sorry, I'm jumping around the slides, but the transaction costs are an individual and are ignored in the basis of value. Evidence, we've already touched on this quite a lot. Factors influencing value, the utility, i.e. the usefulness of the asset. How useful is that asset? Again, remembering that you're buying the right to use rather than the actual structure, and that will impact that contract will say who's got to maintain the building, what happens at the end of a lease or a period of time. So that's where all that type of asset and liability is recorded. Scarcity, so the limited availability of the asset will influence the value. The desire, the demand for the asset. The purchasing power, what about the financial ability to acquire the asset? Supply and demand, but also then taxation, about what actually the tax regimes are for both capital transactions, but also property taxes, for example. So you need to understand all that part around the evidence before you can start to use that comparable evidence. And you need to go back to the basis of value and understand which each element is, and then do your analysis against that that process of or that definition of the basis of value. So the key point then that we move into is the valuation approaches. So we've got the valuation basis. Now, what is the most appropriate valuation? What is the valuation approach which should be adopted? I'm sure that you're all aware there are three main areas of or three main approaches to valuation, the market approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. And just want to run through though that market approach and understanding the comparable evidence, which is which we've been talking about, is key. So you look at that adjustments that you make to that comparable evidence to using the market approach. The cost approach, and I've seen this on numerous occasions, and it's particularly prevalent in areas where the market is not very active and the cost approach is adopted. And I believe certainly in parts of India, this is still one of the main approaches, is that the valuers forget that you're not just trying to work out what the cost of building a house or whatever asset you're looking at is. It's actually you're trying to get to market value. So you're using a cost approach to get to a market value. So you look and you need to say, okay, can I rebuild this building and what would the cost be? But what are the time periods that would be normal? Can I, would it be able to be built and occupied in about the same time as the person who's doing it could actually go and buy something which is already constructed in the marketplace? So you need to use that the cost approach to assess if it's market value, the basis that you're using, that process. And then you look at the income approach and what income can be generated from an asset or liability. And again, remembering we've had a big debate in the UK about sort of the use of discounted cash flow, particularly for investment properties. But you have to be really careful. That we found that many clients are coming along to valuers and asking, how much should I pay for this investment if I want a 5% return, 8% return, whatever their company targets are? And the valuer needs to understand then that what that client is asking for is an investment valuation. What's it worth to that particular company, not a market value, even though the question that the valuer is being asked is, how much should I pay for? But then the second part is to get a 5, 7, 8, 10% return. And that's where it flips over to becoming an investment valuation. So it's different again if the client asks for how much should I pay, what is the market value of this asset or liability. Yeah, that's a market value, but as soon as they start to put their own returns on it, that becomes an investment value or worth to the company, and you need to look at the basis of value for investment purposes. So coming towards the end of my presentation. In conclusion, consistency, the basis of value provide this consistency. Adhering to the international valuation standards promotes consistency in valuation and allows the valuations to be comparable both locally but also cross-border and internationally. The global impact enhances market efficiency and investors' confidence worldwide. So it helps them to be able to not only compare the investment with a similar investment in different parts of the world, but also against different assets. Should the company would they get a better return from real estate or from a business valuation or from gold or arts and antiques? What sort of return would they be able to engage in? And this is one of the things that we are working with a group of valuers, and particularly from India and the association here, on trying to promote valuation as a key expert working group within the G20, to make valuation a key component of all decisions which the G20 make. And this was started, as many of you know, in Delhi a couple of years ago. It progressed on to Brazil last year and is moving on to South Africa this year, with South Africa holding the presidency of the G20. And it's that drive to make the international valuation standards the recognized and required set of standards which allow for better decision making, and that transparency in that process. But really, the bases of value are set within the international valuation standards. There are some other organizations who set their own basis of value, and you need to be aware of those, and particularly if clients start to ask for different ones. There's always a pressure to proliferate, to increase the number of bases of value. I am of the opinion that keeping the basis of value to as small a number as possible helps with the consistency. It does make the valuer's job very challenging, but we're good. So that's what good valuers do. We have to deliver against the criteria which are set for us. So I'm going to draw breath there and stop sharing and see how that message has gone down. Rahul, back to you for a moment.
There's one question which is I like to ask, like how to choose which base is suitable for which type of property. How to choose the base. Yeah.
Yep. Which basis of value? You could. Depends on the question that's being asked of you. So if somebody is saying, a bank want to advance a mortgage, a secured lending on a piece of real estate, then what they want market value, because what they are looking for is confidence that they're not going to lend too much money to an individual, and if the deal went wrong, could they recoup their mortgage? So they want to know what the market will pay. And again, under market value, there's got to be more than one purchaser would act at that transaction price. So again, if you're looking perhaps at an auction as evidence, you might want to take the top bid, the winning bid, as the evidence. I always look very closely at the second bid. How close was the second bid to the top one, so that you get a picture. If your question is from your client that they want to understand what a piece of land or a building is worth to them, that's a different question. And what you'd have to do then is, I would value the individual pieces of land, both the existing, what they've already got, and what they're thinking about acquiring, and then I would do a valuation of the whole to try to establish what the difference in the process might be. So if the client's wanting to know what it is worth to them, that's an investment valuation. If they want to know what the market would pay, which is a completely different question. So it's really price against worth. And for example, how can I've lived in my house for 40 years. We brought up our family here. We're very happy where we live. market value of this is below my individual worth because we like living here. Now, the building is exactly the same. It's not changed, but my son has moved. They're now living with his partner and his dog in another part of the country. So actually, my wife and I don't need as much space as we did previously. So we're now thinking, actually, we might want to move. So the market value has now gone above what our individual worth is for this thing. The building is exactly the same. So, but we value it individually as less than we did previously because we don't need the same process. And that's, you know, I can remember again when we had some very small investment properties that we used to let out. So we as part of my pension I purchased some commercial properties a long time ago now, and we took a mortgage out to buy those investment properties, and we used the rent to pay back the mortgage, and then at the end of the time we would have an investment which we could sell. And that's worked okay. What we did do was when my son was at school, we used some of the rents which we got from the properties to pay his school fees. So, and whenever we got a rent review, I was the landlord and I was very nice to the tenants. Because we wanted the income to pay the school fees and to pay the investment mortgage. So we didn't put the rents up very much. We kept them at a very reasonable level, and the tenants stayed. If they'd left, that would have meant I would have had to find the school fees plus the mortgage repayments out of my earned income. So I kept the rents very low. As soon as we finished the school fees and paid off the mortgage for these properties, I'm not so nice to those tenants anymore, and we want nearly the maximum rent. So the building is exactly the same, but the circumstances change, and that's what drives different things. And if you wanted to use the rental evidence from my lettings, you really needed to understand that I wasn't pushing through my son's school years for the very maximum return. I was happy to receive a less amount. And so if you were going to use that to value something else, you need to try to capture all that information. And that's really difficult, but it's a valuer's job. I don't know what that answers. Sorry, I've got another one there. Kindly elaborate what exactly is consistency and valuation in actual context. Okay, yeah, the consistency in valuation is the consistency in the meaning of the number. So if I just say my house is worth $100,000 US, well, 100,000 first of all, doesn't mean anything. You need to know what currency, and the international valuation standards tell you what you need to say what currency you're valuing. So US dollars or pounds or rupees. Probably quite a lot of difference in the actual meaning of that 100,000. So let's say 100,000 US dollars. Okay. For what? What does that mean? Is that the price? You might get. I was asked once. I don't know if you. Do you guys and girls know Amy Winehouse? She was a pop star who unfortunately passed away from drugs but 10, 15 years ago, I guess now, but a very, very popular pop artist. And I was asked by the press about what that would do to the value of the house that she lived in. Would people pay more or less? And I had to explain that, yeah, somebody might well pay more, but that doesn't make it market value. You've got to have more than one person who would pay more for it, and so it's sort of and that pop star was very popular at that particular period of time, but is less so now. So is that value decreasing because it's more time since she was famous? So all those things you have to take into account and be careful about the evidence. But what you're trying to do is create this framework, like I said about the cars, that if any of you go on to a website and look up what miles per gallon or kilometers per litre a car will do, it creates that knowledge, that framework where you can compare one car. What the basis of value do is create this set of words which then allow you to you or your client to compare one investment with another within a tolerance of reasonableness. Does that help?
Of course, like you said, one of the celebrity, if he or she dies in their, did she die in her own house? You mean?
I think so. I recall.
Okay. So
But
in
also,
Indian context, like please.
Yeah. Also, you have to be aware that somebody might be famous one year, but then actually some disclosures about their life comes out and they're not famous anymore. In fact, they are, sort of. So all those issues are very challenging for the value, and you need to understand that. So if the question is how much can I get for this on the market, that's a sort of brokerage type question. If you are being asked by the bank, how much should we lend on this property? That's a different question. And that's where the market value starts to come in. Good question there. What's a reasonable marketing time? I think you guys are better placed than me to answer that. It depends, but it depends on the economic activities of the time. For example, residential properties in the UK, the supply is limited, so the demand outweighs the supply. And even though we've gone through some difficult economic times, the residential houses still sell fairly quickly if they're at the right price. So we found that sort of the very top end have not selling quite so well, and you look at some of the impacts which are happening around the globe. So the embargo on Russian money entering, all those things start to impact different elements of the marketplace. But for residential property, one would expect in normal times for it to be transactions in 1 to 2 months. If the market's very hot, then it will be. I mean, I remember being in agency business in the late 1970s, early 80s, and the phone just never stopped ringing for people wanting to buy, and people were putting the price up hourly on their houses. We've now got 4 people who want to buy it, so it's gazumping is the term which gets used in the UK. I don't know if it's the same in India. But then you turn around and say, if you're selling a hotel, that might take a year to transact, because because of all the different contracts which would be in place for buying food, for coffee machines, for cleaning, all the different individual contracts. And it will be whether it's going to be sold as a Hilton or whether it's going to be sold as Ben Elder's local hotel. So all those things would come into the time for the transaction. And you just have to watch the marketplace and see what that time period might be. We got any more? Some interruption in audio. Sorry, still getting some problems from.
Ben, if ethically, if we ask, like, what considerations should a valuer keep in mind while selecting the base, any basis of value? Any ethically do they have to keep in consideration?
Yeah, all the way through evaluation and the base selecting the basis of value is one of those steps. And really, ethically, you need to understand and make sure the basis of value is what is going to your client is going to use the valuation for. So no good in providing them with a market value if it is investment value that they want. And you need again to understand and see particularly whether any particular work's been done by your company for that client before. And perhaps if you're operating in the brokerage field as well as the valuation field, you need to check whether your brokerage arm has been doing any particular work for the clients, and whether you are able to provide that valuation at all in that space, and whether it's ethically right to do so. And also that ethical issue about, and this is always a very difficult one, Rahul, in where you have information from a transaction that you've dealt with, and then you want to use it for valuing the next property. So you've done you have privileged information. Now, if that privileged information might impact your first client, then you should be very careful about using that information for your second client. And there's sort of a priority process to protecting your first client, and you certainly should be going back to that first client and gaining their permission to use the information for that next purpose. It's very often contained in your terms of engagement, that process. But again, you just need to be quite clear ethically whether you are morally as well as legally entitled to use that privileged information which you hold, particularly if it's a big investment valuation and lots of details of leases, and perhaps it's a company that's being purchased rather than an individual asset, and maybe a shopping centre, and suddenly you've got access to 20, 30, 40 leases and the rents at which are being paid, and then you get another instruction to value a different shopping centre, and you've got this information, and it would be really useful to be able to use it, but whether you should or not is something that needs to have some really careful consideration. Rahul. Sorry, you're still on mute, Rahul. Sorry if you.
Yeah, thank you. Like, with the change in the technology, and we're talking about new concepts like carbon zero buildings, and then sustainability, and then of course the new AI term which has come. So how does basis of value, are there going to be changes in some in the standards, somewhere? Because yeah.
I don't think they will drive the change in the basis of value, because the basis of value are about market conditions and what the decisions people have. It will change the values, yes, absolutely. But and this is perhaps what I was trying to say earlier on, is that we need to keep that consistency in the basis, that the theoretical, hypothetical framework, which fits the numbers around it. As long as that hypothetical framework remains consistent, then we have a comparable process. If we start to change that that framework, those hypothetical circumstances, then all the previous data that we hold becomes meaningless. So we would lose our points of reference to then say, yes, things have changed, or no, they've not, and the technology, what we're doing now is obviously pre-COVID, we probably would have struggled to have me sitting in the middle of the UK delivering a discussion with all you individuals spread all over India. But it probably changes air travel, it probably changes hotel values, but the basis of which those values are made are the same. And again, what the basis of value should do, help Rahul, is just like they do in the car industry, is to say how the improvements actually go through. So if my car now is much more efficient than the one I had 20 years ago, and you can then track the value of that against its performance, and that's exactly what people and companies start to do around buildings. One really interesting discussion the other week around an intelligent building, so a building which was basically run by computers, sort of the whole building was operated, and there's a real challenge around hacking of those buildings, and then people being held to ransom. So the discussion was, well, they could actually just close all the toilets. They could just lock all the toilets from being used from a central place. So if somebody can hack in, suddenly that building becomes unusable. There may be different ways of doing it rather than just closing the toilets, but they were using it as an example. So having then defenses against that process of hacking become part of the cost of running that type of building. So again, new challenges that we need to think about in what we're delivering and how people occupy real estate. And it will always change. But I think one of the big things, again, talking to some cost engineers, some quantity surveyors recently, they were saying that in a new build of an office, about 70% of the cost can be in mechanical and electricals. So the high-speed lifts, the air conditioning, all the IT which is built into a building now is significantly more than the actual construction costs of the structure, and what that means to its longevity. And maintenance is quite interesting in the valuation space, but that wouldn't impact the basis of value. Again, if your client wanted the market value, you estimate what the transaction might level it might. I call them trigger points. A market value is really a trigger point at which a transaction would normally take place. It hasn't got to take place. And owners of real estate why would you sell at the bottom of a market if you haven't got to? So if you've got some real estate and you're a real estate investor and the market drops, the long-term thinking is, oh, it'll come back, it'll be okay, so we'll hang on. But if you have to sell because your cash flows have been impeded, suddenly that becomes transactional evidence and starts to impact the market. One of the big criticisms of the UK market has been for many years that valuers are too slow to react to downturns in the market and don't reduce values quick enough. And clients sort of say, well, there haven't been any transactions, therefore everything's the same. If you've had interest rates change from 2 or 3% suddenly to 10%, that building is not generating the same income pattern. So somebody today would not pay the same price, and therefore it doesn't have the same value. So all those issues, as I say, I mean, valuing is a really difficult job. I don't know why we do it, except it's really exciting, and being able to interpret the market and understand what's actually happening, but within these parameters of the IVSs. So, what have we got on through the IVS?
Yes, there is someone who has written.
Yeah, just reading. Yeah, I see. Yeah, you're asking for sort of a template to complete. I'm again personally, I'm not a great fan of templates. If you can't, if you're not unable to pull a report together under terms of engagement, then you probably should be thinking whether you've actually got the skill set to deliver the job. The IVS is, I mean, they seem very complicated, you know, and like we've just spent a lot of time talking about the difference between premise of value and basis of value. But actually, what it's doing is codifying the process of carrying out evaluation. It's saying that to carry out evaluation, you would normally, you agree your instructions with your client, so you get your terms of engagement. You agree a basis of value, which you record. So is it an investment value? Is it a synergistic value? Is it a market value? What is it that they're going to do with that valuation? And I've seen lots of occasions where people have said, I want a market value, and then they put them in their company accounts afterwards, which is not necessarily right, because that should be a fair value. You know, again, making sure the client says, you get your instructions, you agree your basis of value, you go to the marketplace and get your evidence. So that's what your job is, to get that evidence. You then have to manage that evidence and that data. And then you apply that data to a model or an approach. So the methodology, you apply it to the methodology, which gives you your answer, and you write your report. And there shouldn't be anything in the report which is not in your letter of instruction. So you've got a template there as a virtuous circle in agreeing. This is one of the big differences in the US, is that they don't put the same amount of work into the terms of engagement as the IVSs require. So to apply the IVSs in the US, you need to do some additional terms of reference work. But if you get those terms of reference right, and again, if you go onto the RICS website under our regulation department, there are some templates there for reports and terms of engagement. But if you get either the IVSs or get hold of the Red Book, our ICS Red Book, which is freely available. You can download the new copy, which is just been published. And it's got minimum requirements for terms of engagement. And if you just make sure that you've got all of those headings in your terms of engagement, you've got a template. And then there are minimum requirements for the report, which almost match the terms of engagement. There are a couple of variances. Then you've got everything that you need to create that report. So I understand that what's being said, but creating the danger is if you get too fixed on the template, then you don't think about the job that you're doing, and you're just ticking a box, which is not what valuation is about. Valuation is thinking about every case and trying to and I know that's difficult when perhaps you're not being paid very much and you've got lots of small jobs to do, but it's those small jobs which then, if you get wrong, come back to bite you.
That's correct. That's correct.
Got any more?
I've put the questions. If anybody have questions, we can put it on the floor or want to ask, particularly from security financials point of view, or in terms of legality point of view. You have someone from Australia as well?
Sir,
Okay, Mr. Arun. Yeah.
yes. Sir, I wish to ask that it is a prerogative of valuer which method to be used to value a real estate or property, cost approach, income approach, or otherwise market approach. So can you throw some light on this, please?
Yeah. Sure. It is the valuer's responsibility to select the appropriate method or methods. So it can be more than one. Again, I'm a great believer in doing more than one method just to check whether it's the right numbers. What isn't right is to do two methods and then average them. I was doing some trying to advise somebody the other day, and they got a really difficult job because the government in this particular country, wasn't India, but I won't say where it was, but they were doing some valuations for compulsory purchase, and the government wanted to use the comparable method, which is fine, but the evidence they wanted to use was one from local transactions, which was good. They wanted to use the tax banding, which the property tax banding. They wanted to use some geospatial information, which they got, and then they wanted to average the value out of those three evidence pots, which clearly doesn't give any right answer to anything. But yeah, it's the valuer's responsibility to select the appropriate methodology. Again, in the UK, we had some really big pushbacks on this because our ICS recommended the income approach for when you're carrying out investment valuations. So, for pensions and for investment companies, and we were saying the most appropriate methodology is the discounted cash flow. And we've had really big pushback, quite rightly, in my view, because what the valuers are saying, it's our job to select, and we select on the basis of the evidence which we have available to us. So if there's some great comparable evidence, why would you do an income approach? Because by the time you've converted it into an income, you've probably distorted the number. If you have got no comparable evidence, then an income approach might be a very sensible way to go if it's an income generating piece of real estate. If there's no evidence, then you start to move to the cost basis. But as I said, that is a really challenging way. I know some people think it's say easy or easier way of coming to a value. Actually, it's a really difficult method to apply because you are transgressing a line which is from cost into value, and as we all know, they're not the same things. Again, I had a chance of a discussion with a hotel developer in the Middle East, and they had built a hotel, and they had put beautiful fittings in it, gold bath taps, marble floors, etc. But then couldn't sell the investment for what they'd spent on it, and he was really upset because he thought because he'd spent the money that would just increase the value, but he built in the wrong part of town. So probably another 10 years before that part of town catches up with the economic activities which he would require for somebody to invest in his hotel.
Yes, sir. Got it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, great, Aaron. Any other questions or comments?
So we also have David. David, would you like to have any question or highlight the input?
No, it's David from Australia here. G'day, Ben. We haven't spoken for a couple of years.
Hi, David. How are you doing? Good to speak to you.
Very well, sir. I'll turn the video on, but
Must be midnight.
working. There you go. So I've got sparkly lights behind me. So yeah, just a Friday night here in Adelaide. Another brilliant piece of work from the IVSC and the and I'll see if I can get this right, the AAAVRF.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm just here to listen and look, happy to, as I said to Alex and the crew last week, we're doing a lot of stuff here in Australia, and I know we're the other side of the world, but if it helps anybody or any of our stuff we're doing is useful, I'm happy to share. So reach out. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, David. No, that's great.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
David's got a real challenge in that space, and with Australia and RICS and API having discussions, and particularly around inspection, particularly for residential properties. And is it really a valuation without an inspection? RICS's position is that the definition of evaluation in the Red Book, it's after an inspection. So an inspection takes place to be a valuation, unless you move away with the agreement of your client. So it creates that transparency.
Exactly. So, and sorry, Ben, to jump in there. Yeah, get your instructions lined up right. You mentioned it earlier, retainer agreements, terms of reference, whatever you want to call it, instructions. Get your contract set up right. And move forward from there. In Australia, we have slightly different legal concepts here around tort law. So we've got some very, hence why we've written our rules like we wrote our rules. But yeah, get it set up right. If you don't inspect and if you're a valuer, you don't inspect in some way, shape, or form. That forward evaluation, that's all we say here, sort of thing. And that's, hey, Ben, you and I are old bastards. Sorry, that came out loud. That's how we got taught. That's what we learned back in the old days. So we try and reinforce that. If I can teach the kids how to do their jobs properly, I've done my role.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, it's that. It's again, it's about that professional judgment about whether if you don't think you can do the job on the information that you can gather or you can have access to, then you should decline the instructions. And that's the end. And I know that's really difficult when you're trying to run a business and you've got pressures to do all sorts of things. But the professional approach, and again, the definition of being a professional is that you put your client before yourself, and therefore you make those difficult decisions about whether you are the right person to provide that information to your client. And usually you are. In fact, you'll be fantastically placed to advise clients. But if you are either being pressured by them to come to particular answers, if you're being denied access to certain information which you know exists. Again, for example, in the UK, I helped a valuation firm recently where they'd been asked to do a valuation for secured lending on quite a big piece of real estate in London. And they did it, and they put in their report, they recommended an environmental study should be carried out on the property to confirm the valuation. And the bank then turned around and said, oh, we've got one of those, but they hadn't disclosed it to the valuer. And you go, well, God, you know, why? And they said, and the bank said, well, we just wanted to see whether they get the right number or not. Well, yeah, I mean, that's terrible practice. And again, RICS are pulling together some lists around environmental, social, and governance requirements, which again, I think this is one of the biggest challenges we're facing at the moment as valuers, is that a lot of the financial reporting, so fair value requirements, are done at a company level, and they want specific advice about parts of value. So which part of the value is environmental, which part is governance, etc. And they're expecting valuers to be able to tell them those numbers. We're not fully qualified in that space at the moment. I think it's something that we're going to have to learn. And we're going to have to get better at. But the big question to me is that most of those numbers for financial reporting are done at the entity level, at business level. And we are looking at individual assets. And is it right just to add up individual assets to get to a total of environmental, social, and governance requirements? I don't think that's been quite thought through completely yet. But again, I mean, the big question we're asked in the UK at the moment is how much capital expenditure is going to be required on this building to keep it within lettable requirements, you know, and that's a fairly hefty call to make. So it's about what. Because again, we're moving into territory in the UK and particularly into Europe about buildings not being able to be let. And again, David will know the same sort of things in Australia about properties not being able to let or transact unless they meet certain social, environmental requirements.
Yeah, and Ben, I mean, we're going a little bit off topic of what this one started out as, which was basis of value, but the idea is let's keep the conversation going while people are here. Our job is to report what we know. We as valuers, we can't make stuff up. That's for other people to do. You know, I won't even go down that path right now. If you can't verify the information you've got, then don't use it in the valuation process.
Yep.
Happy to argue that with anybody, but that's my approach, and that's what I'm trying to instill here in Australia. And And I love my New Zealand friends across the ditch. They're just following what we do, and occasionally we argue with them. But yeah, happy to take any conversations that anyone has.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Again, great question in there. It's come in the chat box about off-book transactions, undocumented deals, shadows. Again, you shouldn't be supporting that process if you're actually that legality issue. If you're assisting people to break the law, then there will be ethical challenges from your professional body. There will be probably legal challenges coming in your direction. But the big challenge is around using that evidence in your valuation. And as I say, it can be very misleading when you get a recorded transaction at X, but you know that actually additional payments were made, which would make the actual transaction to come to Y. And again, market expectations are but until you start to lift all of those into the market value definition of basis of value, then those issues will continue. And one of the ways that the West has dealt with it over a long period of time was the issues around capital gains tax, whereby you declared what you purchased it for and you declare what you sold it for. And if you are daft enough to agree a lower number for your purchase price, you're going to pay more tax when you sell, unless you can convince somebody at that stage to put a false declaration in. But you're really starting to, why not pay the appropriate taxation regime? And then you start to get better evidence. If you get better evidence, there's more confidence in that marketplace, and the risk is reduced. And what happens when you reduce risk? Values go up. So having a transparent, reliable marketplace enhances the market transactions and the confidence in that marketplace, and reduces the risk. And as I say, you will know the calculation for years purchase. I am old enough to have learnt it off by heart when I did my examinations. So, being able to calculate years purchase, and as the risk reduces, the values go up, because that's what it is, and that's what particularly foreign direct investment look at in marketplaces, is what are the risks. And if they don't, they will purchase in risky places. In fact, some overseas people purposely seek out risky investments, but they won't pay very much money for them because they want to make the returns. And if they're taking the risks, they want the returns. So again, creating this framework of transparency and knowledge and confidence assists the marketplace. And that's part of it. That's what we're here to do.
Thank you, Ben. Do we have any other questions? So Sandeep Dev was not here today. So if we don't have any other questions, then we would wrap the sessions a little earlier. Any other questions, please?
No.
We have one from Sri Lanka, Mr. Fatihu. Am I audible to you, Mr. Fatihu? Okay. I don't think so. So anyways, I think as we conclude, today's enlightening session is on IVS 102 basis of value. We'd like to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who participated and contributed to this discussion. Your engagement has truly enriched today's experience. Special thank you to Ben, our esteemed speaker today. Your presentations and your expertise and insights provided us a deeper understanding of the various bases of value and their applications, in valuation practice. We're grateful, for the time and knowledge you've shared with us today. To all the participants, thank you for your thoughtful questions and involvement. We hope
Thank you so
you
much.
found the session informative and beneficial for your professional practices which you're going to run. And as a reminder, recording sessions of the webinar along with the presentation material will be shared via email. We encourage you for your reviews and to reach out with us and any additional questions on the topic we would like to explore further in the future. Thank you once again for joining us. We would look forward to see you at our upcoming webinars next Friday. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Ben, once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry
sir.
that
Thank you,
you
everyone,
get
sir.
Sandeep.
Have a nice
and,
weekend. Thank you.
Alex, yeah. Thank you,
Of course.
everybody. And I'll send the presentation through, Rahul.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, Ben. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.